it seems to me that what's the old, I think it was George Santayana who said, those who forget history are doomed to repeat it. Or, I don't know, who some old philosopher. And here we are. I mean, we're forgetting that we invented al-Qaeda in order to throw the Soviets out of Afghanistan. We brought bin Laden into this thing and paid his way. We ignored him under the Bush administration for 9 months until he struck us on 9/11, which he had basically told us he was going to do. And this was willful dereliction of duty, arguably, by Dick Cheney and George W. Bush. Bush took the longest vacation in the history of the American presidency. Went down to Crawford, Texas for almost a month. And then when his vacation was over and he was supposed to return to Washington, D.C., and he was getting all this intelligence that there was a strike coming on Washington and New York, he was afraid to go back to D.C., George W. Bush. I mean, the CIA actually had, they had one of their guys fly down to Crawford, Texas to hand deliver the August 6th presidential daily briefing that was headlined, bin Laden determined to strike inside the U.S. And George W. Bush patted the guy on the butt or on the knee, one or the other, and said, okay, you've covered your ass, go back to Washington, D.C. It's a pretty much verbatim quote. Also filed, by the way, on Monday, this all goes back to this lawsuit by survivors of 9/11 who are suing the Saudis. Again, from the New York Times, the New York piece, the headline, Moussaoui calls Saudi princes patrons of al-Qaeda by Scott Shane in today's New York Times. Also filed on Monday in the survivors lawsuit were affidavits from former Senators Bob Graham of Florida, or was he a Republican or a Democrat? Oh, he might have been a Democrat. In any case, and Bob Kerrey of Nebraska, and the former Navy Secretary John Lehman. These are substantial names. Graham and Kerry were on the 9/11 Commission, arguing that more investigation was needed into Saudi ties to the 9/11 plot. Mr. Graham was co-chairman of the Joint Congressional Inquiry into the attacks, and Mr. Kerry and Mr. Lehman served on the 9/11 Commission. Mr. Graham said, quote, I am convinced that there was a direct line between at least some of the terrorists who carried out this 9/11 attacks and the government of Saudi Arabia, wrote Mr. Graham, who has long demanded the release of 28 pages of the congressional report on the attacks that explore Saudi connections and therefore remain classified. Mr. Kerry said in the affidavit that it was fundamentally inaccurate and misleading to argue that the 9/11 Commission exonerated the Saudi government. But let's go back even farther. I mean, the intelligence failures, and I realize there's a discussion about whether this was even an intelligence failure. Right? 2 years before George W. Bush put Dick Cheney in charge of counterterrorism, the Counterterrorism Task Force, that was in January 2001. And this was, they were throwing a bone to Sandy Berger and Al Gore and Bill Clinton, saying, yeah, okay, we'll look into bin Laden. We'll create a counterterrorism task force. We're going to put the vice president in charge of it. Cheney was in charge of the counterterrorism task force, and he was in charge of the energy task force. The energy task force started immediately. No environmentalists allowed, just oil industry barons. And what were they doing? They were dividing up Western Iraq, the oil fields, the unexplored or the unexploited oil fields of Western Iraq, creating maps and spreadsheets of what countries and what companies they would sell the Iraqi oil to once they had attacked Iraq. Now, this was in January and February of 2001, before 9/11. And you'll recall that George W. Bush's brother, Jeb, signed a letter in 1998 to President Bill Clinton over the letterhead of the committee, the Project for a New American Century, saying that a new Pearl Harbor would be necessary to motivate and bring the American people into line with their thinking. But if that were to happen, then the time has come to invade Iraq and take down Saddam Hussein. Saddam Hussein, who represented absolutely no threat to the United States, but Iraq, as Dick Cheney famously said over and over and over again, and we get the clip of it around here someplace, he said Iraq sits on top of 10% of the world's oil reserves, very significant reserves. And not only is it 10% of the world's oil, it's some of the cheapest oil on earth. So, the question has been asked when Bush went to Crawford with all these alarm, code red, sirens going off, Richard Clark running around with his hair on fire, everybody saying, oh my God, Dick Cheney's counterterrorism task force had not yet met, not even once, in August when Bush went on vacation. And after his vacation, he was so afraid to go back to D.C., I think because, he'd been told, hey, something's going to happen. We don't know what, but it's not safe, that he went to the state that his brother was the governor of, Florida, Jeb Bush, and Jeb Bush put the entire state on lockdown, declared a state of emergency for Florida. And thus, George W. is sitting in a second-grade class reading My Pet Goat as 9/11 happens. And then he goes hopscotching around state to state, scared to death that these guys are coming after him. But then we can take it back to Reagan. Reagan was so fond of these Islamic jihadists, he gave them $5 billion of taxpayer money. He invited them to the White House. He called them freedom fighters. One of those guys, not one of the ones who came to the White House, but one of the guys who was there, one of the Mujahideen fighters, was Osama bin Laden. He got his start by joining the Mujahideen that was funded by Reagan and the CIA. Before that, he was studying to get a degree in econ and business administration from a Saudi Arabian college. The BBC in 2004 claimed that bin Laden himself wasn't just supported by Reagan, he was given military training by Reagan's CIA. When are we going to point this stuff out?
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-536-2370.
Is it time to have a trial for the Bush war criminals and to put on the record Reagan's role in this?